Hey guys, welcome back to Chris and Retro. Tonight's video, I'm going to talk about isolation and how we're going to look at multiple pieces of this, but the primary two areas I want to focus on was look at what isolation is, how it manifests itself in our lives, and some possible suggestions on how to. The second part being possible suggestions on how to move beyond it, and some values that you can find by taking some of these moves. Let's start, I think, by basics of what isolation is. And I've got just I thought I'd just pull up a definition, just figured it's a lot easier. Isolation is a process or act of isolating or being isolated. The isolation of old people is the example they gave. Now, some synonyms for this is separation, segregation, setting apart, keeping apart, or quarantine, which I found interesting to have those all be synonymous with isolation, given the fact that some of the things about isolation that have been so damaging, particularly in the youth, have gone a lot along with the quarantine thing. So that'll be interesting to see where we go with the conversation. Hopefully, you find some benefit in this. The thing is, we look at isolation, having these definitions in front of us. Um, there's different ways that isolation manifests itself in lives. One is we do it to ourselves out of perceived danger. We find that isolation and hiding oftentimes give us a sense of safety. You know, the other thing we do is people in active use. A lot of times, I would, as a matter of protection, for my secrets. So I would isolate just to not to expose myself for the constant intake of alcohol that I had. So I'd become more removed from society. I wouldn't show up for family events. I would generally stay away from those that I didn't want to understand the truth about what my life would become selfishly. A lot of times people are just like, kind of forget it. I don't want to do anything. A lot of times I was looking up, trying to find, some companion videos to share with you about this subject. And it's interesting. There's a lot of stuff out there about youth and video games. A lot of times kids will just move away from society just to hide in their room and play video games. It's been a huge problem. We've experienced that in our house with, multiple children coming up through the house and now some younger children in the house. That kind of selfish need to just do what they want to do can also be a form of isolation. Circumstance, the example they gave in the definition was the elderly. Circumstance, if you're an elderly person, you live out in your original home, you're still in that home and there's probably not a lot of population or help around you the older you get. That type of isolation is circumstance, or a long-term illness. If you find yourself in hospital for a long period of time, these are also things that are isolation. So isolation in and of itself isn't necessarily something that's self-induced, but perhaps what we'll do in this video for the subject matter at hand is really talk about when we choose to, what we do in our life, and what forms of isolation we may bring on. These other things aren't really necessarily things we can cause; they're things we may have to address. But when it comes to addiction and recovery, for your recovery to be effective, you need to find effective ways to deal with isolation. Some of the ways that we mask it when we're in recovery, or we're not in recovery, we're still in active use, we want to give on the idea that we care about our recovery, especially for those that are loving us, a husband or wife, or a parent, or a friend. We may want them to believe that we're doing better when in fact we probably aren't. So we'll put out masks like, quote unquote, knowing the steps of a 12-step program, run through 12 steps by heart. Um, Quote unquote, going to meetings. So you can show up to meetings drunk all the time, but you're still going to meetings, because it's a pretty easy thing to do. The thing with 12-step programs is it's pretty easy to still participate and not actually take part, if that makes any sense. So I can participate and go to meetings so others think I'm going to a meeting. However, if I'm not doing the work of that meeting, I'm not actually engaged. I'm just showing up. The other thing that I've noticed is knowing the lingo. If you go into a meeting or around a group of individuals that are very young in their recovery, everybody's slinging, saying lingo after lingo about what the group's going to be. I pick on it all the time, but by God's grace and you good people, I heard that 100 times over, with people that are just trying to make it seem like they're really in the middle of recovery and they're still struggling, and then you find out they're 24 days or 24 hours or, whatever, shorter term there. And they're finding the lingo as being the thing that's their salvation rather than the work. There's different types of isolation. It can be, you can feel isolated and alone. You can be isolated in crowds, obviously in drugs, in the bottle, alcohol bottle, in sex, in a job, in gambling. It's really anything that takes you intentionally remove yourself from some reality that you don't want to face. And in many cases, in my case, in my addiction, I didn't want to face any of it. I wanted to have my cake and eat it too, have my bottle and live life too. And for me, a bottle doesn't coexist well with really anything except other people that are drinking their life away, and that doesn't even always work either because you end up in a parking lot rolling around, punching them in the face. So it's like there's really no good place to be. So maybe it's better that we are isolated. But that is one of the things that you do. Now, as you're going through mental health seasons where you're really struggling with depression or anxiety, you can feel isolated too. So I've just talked about a few things that when we're in addiction and we're in recovery, that we choose to be isolated and we choose to remove ourselves. But there's many times when we're not drinking or using drugs or anything like that at all, and we still feel very much not part of society. That's the only way I've described it from my own history. I've professed on here before, diagnosed depression, anxiety. What I've noticed is that there are times it starts to become evident to me that I'm having some problems with my mental health when I start to feel like the world around me is moving around and doing their own thing and I don't belong. I wrote one time about feeling like I was a fly in the wall, not on the wall. So, the cliche, I wish I was a fly on the wall where you could listen to the conversations that you weren't present. In this case, I always felt like I was a fly in the wall. I didn't belong in the room, but I didn't belong out of the room. I didn't know where I was. I just kind of was in the middle of the two worlds, between two rooms, stuck, just watching everything go by. That was when my own mind put isolating me in a lot of ways and not allowing me to engage in a life that I wanted. But yet, as I was getting further and further away from my addiction, I had isolated that world, and I wasn't accepted there because I wasn't doing the things that require acceptance there. And that is basically just getting blitz drunk, spending all your money and living that life. I also didn't really belong in this new world yet because I hadn't really shown myself to be serious about being in that world. I would start to profess it and then slip back, start to profess it, then slip back, a few more charges, then slip back. It's like I didn't give myself any credibility that I was actually going into this new world and this new life. So for my mental health, I'd feel like I didn't belong. And that's a very common feeling that you have, especially in your recovery from addiction, where you've spent a very good season of your life creating this brand about who you were. And when you try to shed that world and move into a new world, you're going to go through a season where you don't feel like you belong anywhere. And this is where some of these solutions I think can help. So a few things that I would look at is you got to move beyond this stage somehow, even if it's in your mind, but I think there's some actions that we can take. It really comes down to connecting, that connectivity. In fact, around here, we have a number of recovery programs. In fact, I spoke at one in another county a few weeks ago. They call themselves Connections Rounded Recovery. Well, that Connections Rounded Recovery is really based on the fact it's not a treatment facility. It's just a place for people to get connected as they work out their sobriety or work through their trouble in active use. It really comes down to connection to help you move beyond it. And sometimes we don't have the energy to fully be connected. We had Kayla Ross on here a couple weeks ago, and she was talking about, we talked about progress. And sometimes when you see a dish full of a sink full of dishes, sometimes it's just progress to do a few of the dishes. At least it's not the big pile anymore, even if you don't have the energy to do the whole set of dishes. Same thing with isolation. You may not be ready to, be a keynote speaker or be the life of the party, but just making some small engagement can help you move towards better days. So some suggestions would be, in that small engagement, find what works for you. Find what small step you can do, even if it's just going to the grocery store and interacting with other human beings for a minute. Go to the mall and walk around and just be around humanity. Sometimes if you're so far isolated, sometimes it's just a matter of forcing yourself to be in a public place at times. Make a phone call to somebody. Maybe a family member you haven't talked to in a while, or a friend you haven't spoken to. Or perhaps somebody you met in a meeting somewhere that has given you a phone number that you can reach out. Just one phone call, not 100. No commitment for a date every week to meet with this person. Just a phone call. It starts there. One text out of nowhere. Maybe that text is not even for help for you. Maybe you just reach out and check on somebody else and see how they're doing. That might be the most beneficial thing, because now you're starting to focus on their needs and what they need, and you can help them. And it might start removing some of that thinking. Go to one meeting. It doesn't have to be an AA meeting or an NA meeting. It can be just about any meeting. You can go to one of these community centers I just described, like Connections, and take part in an art class, or they're free, go to the library, something, but start getting involved around other people. Probably the library is not the best for isolation based on its environment, but you can, you know, go to, I don't know, go listen to music if it's not in a setting that's going to trip up your addiction. Just do it once. Try it once. And if that works, then maybe try it again in a day or two. But start getting yourself some traction where you're around people that you can find connectivity. I guess the most important part I get that's really important with isolation, always has been for me, I get this false notion that I'm the only one going through it. Like, I don't know if you feel this way, but oftentimes I do, where either choosing to isolate or feeling isolated, in the sense where the world is operating without me being included, um, I forget the fact there's a high likelihood that one or more people in the room that I've chosen to go into are feeling the exact same way. I assume that I'm the only one going into the room feeling this way, but perhaps there's many people in the room that feel that way. And I would argue that's probably true. You think the things that we've gone through here, um, with the pandemic and the quarantining and everything else that goes on with just disease alone, the way our society has changed and how we treat some of these communicable diseases, that in and of itself, that overabundance of caution has really hammered the youth's mental health because of forced isolation. So our willingness to engage, at least in small ways, we're probably in a room full of people that feel it very similar way, or at least a good portion of the room. I guess it's not only not being alone, but understanding that you're not alone, if that makes any sense. So the not being alone is the engagement, the connection. But I can be in a room full of people and feel isolated. I don't know about you. In fact, I have a video here I'll share with you too. It's not really anything informative, except I love the imagery of it. I was going to try to incorporate it more, and I decided not to. And now as I'm talking, I decided to do it again. So this video, you ever felt like this? You just stand and the world's moving around you. I have. I felt like that before. Multiple times, actually, where I feel like the world just is going on around me. What you'll find is that any number of these people in the background here might feel like this gentleman right here. Isolated, not part of it. So you might not even be the only person in the room that has those feelings. Thank you for tuning in tonight. I want to give you this short video on isolation. It's a pretty significant part of our self-sabotage, in fact, in terms of our recovery. The more that we're unwilling to connect, the more likely we are to have a reoccurrence, or less likely we are to move beyond our active use. Connection is key to a lot of it. It's new information. It's getting our eyes off ourselves and off our circumstances. Sometimes it's opening up service options for us so we feel like we have value and we're offering that hope and help. But if you take any suggestion away from this video, just do one thing to break that cycle in a day. One text, one phone call. If you've got the energy, go to one meeting. It all is just a new room and a new place where you're not entirely dwelling inside your head. We've talked about it 1,000 times on the show. If we talked about it once, being in your head is very destructive for us as humans. Guys, thanks for tuning in. Please like and subscribe. I really would appreciate your support. I do appreciate your support for those that are watching, and please spread the word about the show. We want to continually provide value and provide it to the greatest reach we possibly can here. And, put your comments in. We've had some great comments, some that are a little bit sad with some struggles people are going through. We had a comment on an older video the other day I noticed. I had a video out there about why do people hate addicts? I forget what the title of it was, but from some time ago, there was a new comment on there, and it was somebody that was struggling. And I just really appreciate the fact that people are willing to be vulnerable and share their stories a little bit on here. That's kind of what this whole point is. We're fellow travelers and we're community members in this work that we're all just trying to figure out. Hopefully the information I share is going to be useful to you as you travel for your journey, as I do mine. Please check us out Sunday. I have Sammy back on. Sammy Says we do our signature moments every Sunday. We're going to do this as long as we possibly can, based on circumstances and technology. Last week we had some technological issues. We may have a way of solving that this week, but either way, we're just going to keep plugging away with that. It's a way for us to be of service as we go through a tough season in our home, and hopefully that's something you find beneficial. Between now and the next time we talk, I'm going to do every single thing I can do to stay out of trouble. And I hope you do too.